People talk about dangerous jobs today: logging, deep sea fishing, working on a skyscraper. And they are dangerous, no doubt about it. But they are nothing compared to the daily life of an early human. For our distant ancestors, there was no separation between work and life. Work was life. And life was a constant, relentless struggle against death. Every single day was a list of tasks that could kill you. There was no safety net, no emergency services, no antibiotics. So, what was the most dangerous job? It's a simple question with a complicated answer. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything. But if we have to break it down, if we have to look at the roles people played in these small, tight-knit groups, we can start to see where the danger was most concentrated. We can see the roles that required someone to walk right up to death and look it in the eye, day after day. The obvious answer, the one everyone thinks of first, is the hunter. And for good reason. Imagine the world of the hunter. We're not talking about a quiet walk in the woods with a high-powered rifle. We're talking about the Pleistocene, a time of giants. The animals were bigger, stronger, and meaner than anything alive today. There were mammoths, giant furry elephants with curving tusks as long as a car. There were woolly rhinos built like armored trucks. There were cave bears that would dwarf a modern grizzly. And there were the predators, saber-toothed cats with teeth like daggers, dire wolves that hunted in packs, to giant, short-faced bears that could run down a horse. This was the world the hunter had to walk into. And what did the hunter have? A sharp stick. That's basically it. Maybe they had a stone point lashed to the end of it. The spear. It was an extension of their arm, but it was still just a piece of wood against a mountain of muscle and fury. There was no distance. To kill something like a steppe bison, an animal that weighed over a ton, you had to get close. You had to smell its breath. You had to see the wildness in its eyes. You had to be within its reach. The methods they used were desperate and incredibly risky. One common technique was persistence hunting. This meant chasing an animal for hours, sometimes for days, under the hot sun. Humans, with our lack of fur and our ability to sweat, are surprisingly good long-distance runners. We can outlast many four-legged animals. The hunter would track the prey, running it to the point of complete exhaustion. But this was a marathon of danger. The hunter was exposed, away from the relative safety of the group. They could get lost, they could suffer from heat stroke or dehydration, and at the end of the chase, they still had to face an exhausted but cornered and terrified animal. An animal that would fight for its life with its last ounce of strength. Another method was the ambush. Hiding, waiting for the prey to come close, and then attacking with a sudden burst of violence. This required incredible patience and coordination. A single mistake, a snapped twig, or a cough, and the chance was gone. If the attack was successful, it was still chaos, a frenzy of stabbing spears and thrashing hooves. A hunter could easily be gored, trampled, or kicked. A broken leg was a death sentence. There was no one to set it. You couldn't keep up with the group. You were left behind. And then there were the big hunts, the ones that required the whole group, driving a herd of animals towards a cliff or into a narrow ravine. This was effective. Archaeologists have found massive bone beds at the bottom of cliffs, evidence of successful mass kills. But imagine the terror of being part of that drive, running alongside a stampeding herd of giant bison, waving torches and shouting to keep them moving in the right direction. One slip, one wrong step, and you were under them, crushed into the dirt in a second. Even if the hunt was a success, the danger wasn't over. And a wounded animal is one of the most dangerous things in nature. It's in pain, it's terrified, and it will lash out at anything. The final kill was the most perilous moment, and after the kill, the work of butchering began, using sharp flint knives to cut through thick hide and muscle. It was hard, messy work. A slip of the knife could cause a deep gash, and in a world without antiseptic, any wound could become infected. A small cut could lead to a fever, then sepsis, and then a slow, painful death. The pressure on the hunter was immense. It wasn't just their own life on the line. A failed hunt meant the entire group went hungry. The children, the elders, everyone depended on them. The psychological weight of that responsibility must have been crushing. Every time they left the camp, they knew they might not come back. And they knew that if they failed, the people they loved might starve. So, yes. The hunter had an incredibly dangerous job. It was a life of intense, violent risk. It was a constant confrontation with terrifying beasts. But was it the most dangerous? Maybe not. There was another way to get meat. It was less glorious than hunting. It was messier, but it might have been even more dangerous. This was the job of the scavenger. We have this image of early humans as mighty hunters, the top of the food chain. But for a very long time, we weren't. We were opportunists, we were survivors, sure, we were scavengers. This didn't mean picking at old, abandoned carcasses. It meant something far more daring. It meant stealing. Imagine the scene. A pride of lions has just brought down a giant elk. The kill is fresh. The lions are feeding. They are at their most aggressive, protective of their hard-won meal. And now, a small group of early humans appears. They don't have claws. They don't have powerful jaws. They have rocks and sticks and courage that borders on insanity. Their job is to get that meat. They would have to work as a team, making loud noises, shouting, banging rocks together, waving their arms, trying to intimidate and confuse the apex predators. They were trying to bluff their way to a meal. It was a battle of nerves. They had to get close enough to make the predators nervous, to make them back away for just a moment. Long enough for one or two of them to run in, cut off a limb with a sharp stone tool, and drag it away. Every second of this encounter was fraught with mortal danger. A lion can close a 50-yard gap in a few seconds. If the bluff failed, if one of the predators decided to charge instead of retreat, someone was going to die. A horrible, violent death. The scavenger was facing not just a large herbivore, but a professional killer. An animal designed by evolution for the sole purpose of killing. And it wasn't just lions. They had to compete with other scavengers, packs of giant hyenas, which were much larger and more powerful than their modern cousins. These were bone-crushing specialists, and they would not give up a meal easily. A confrontation between a group of humans and a clan of hyenas over a carcass would have been a terrifying spectacle of noise and aggression. Even if they managed to steal a piece of the kill, the dangers continued. The meat might already be starting to spoil. Eating rotten meat can lead to food poisoning, to diseases we can't even imagine. They had to know what was safe to eat and what wasn't. A mistake could wipe out the whole group. The job of the scavenger required a unique kind of bravery. It wasn't the proactive courage of the hunter, but the reactive, opportunistic courage of the thief. And it was about seeing a window of opportunity in a life or death situation and having the guts to take it. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy, and the risk was absolute. So we have the hunter facing the raw power of the megafauna. We have the scavenger facing the cunning and ferocity of the apex predators. Both jobs were undeniably deadly. But what about the other half of the diet? What about the gatherers? Picking plants sounds easy, safe even. Compared to fighting a mammoth, what's the risk in digging up some roots or picking some berries? This is a profound misunderstanding of the world our ancestors lived in. The job of the gatherer, who was often a woman, was a minefield of hidden dangers. It was a game of botanical roulette. For every edible plant, there are dozens that are poisonous. Some will just make you sick. Others will kill you. A slow, agonizing death from organ failure or paralysis. There were no field guides, no books with pictures and descriptions. All knowledge was passed down through generations. But how was that knowledge first acquired? Through trial and error. Someone, somewhere, was the first person to eat that pretty red berry. And then someone had to watch them die to learn that it was poison. Every edible plant in their diet was likely discovered at the cost of a human life. The gatherer had to be a walking encyclopedia of botany. They had to know which leaves were safe, which roots were nourishing, which mushrooms would kill you. They had to know the seasons. They had to know how to prepare certain plants to neutralize their toxins. A single mistake, a moment of inattention, or misidentifying a plant could be a fatal error, not just for them, but for anyone they shared the food with. And the dangers weren't just the plants themselves. While the hunters were off in the open plains, the gatherers were often in the woods, along riverbanks, or in dense thickets. These places were full of other dangers. This was the home of snakes. A bite from a venomous snake, far from any help, was a death sentence. There were spiders, scorpions, and insects that could deliver a fatal sting or bite. The gatherer also had to be constantly aware of predators. While the big cats might be hunting on the plains, a lone forager in the woods was an easy target for a leopard or another ambush predator. They couldn't be as loud or aggressive as a hunting party. Their work required quiet concentration. They had to venture away from the main camp, often alone or in small groups, making them vulnerable. Getting lost was another huge risk. Their territory might have been vast. Forgetting a landmark, taking a wrong turn, or being caught out by a sudden change in the weather could mean being separated from the group. To be alone in that world was to be dead. There was no way to survive for long without the safety and cooperation of the group. The danger for the gatherer was different from the danger for the hunter. The hunter faced moments of extreme, obvious peril. It was a series of sprints across a battlefield. The gatherer faced a constant low-level hum of danger. It was a marathon through a minefield. The threats were quieter, more insidious, but no less deadly. A single mistake could be just as final as a mammoth's tusk. So now we have three very dangerous jobs: the hunter, the scavenger, and the gatherer. But there was another role. A job so fundamental, so absolutely essential, that without it, none of the others would matter. And it may have been statistically the most dangerous job of all. This was the job of being a mother. The job of childbirth and child rearing. For an early human woman, pregnancy and childbirth were the most perilous times of her life. We take modern medicine for granted. We forget that for almost all of human history, giving birth was a life-threatening event. There were no doctors, no surgeons, no sterile environments. There was just the woman, maybe a few other women from the group to help, and a world of potential complications. A baby in the wrong position, a breech birth, was often a death sentence for both mother and child. There was no way to perform a cesarean section. Hemorrhaging or excessive bleeding after birth was common, and there was very little anyone could do to stop it. Infection was a massive killer. Any tearing or internal injury could easily become infected in the unsanitary conditions of a prehistoric camp. Puerperal fever or childbed fever would have claimed countless lives. The fossil record gives us clues. Skeletons of young adult women found with the tiny skeletons of newborns inside their pelvis tell a tragic and common story. It's likely that childbirth was one of the leading, if not the leading, cause of death for women in their reproductive years. Every single pregnancy was a roll of the dice. A woman who had several children was a true survivor. She had walked through the valley of death and come out the other side multiple times. And the danger didn't end with a successful birth. The mother and the newborn were incredibly vulnerable. A mother recovering from childbirth was weakened, less able to flee from danger. And a crying baby was a beacon for predators. It was a signal to every hungry carnivore for miles around that there was a helpless meal nearby. The job of caring for the young was a relentless 24-hour, a-day responsibility. Early human toddlers, just like modern ones, would have had no sense of danger. They would wander towards the river, pick up a snake, or try to pet a large, unfriendly animal. The caregiver had to be constantly vigilant. A moment's distraction could lead to a tragedy. Keeping a small, curious human alive in a world full of mortal threats was a full-time, high-stakes job. So, when we ask what the most dangerous job was, the answer starts to depend on how you define danger. Do you mean the risk of a quick, violent death? That was the hunter or the scavenger. Do you mean the risk of a slow, agonizing death from a hidden mistake? That was the gatherer. Do you mean the single most statistically lethal event in a person's life? For a huge portion of the population, that was childbirth. The truth is, there was no safe job for an early human. Every aspect of life was interwoven with risk. Let's think about the other tasks that had to be done. Making tools. This was essential for survival. You needed sharp flint flakes to butcher animals, scrape hides, and make other tools. The process of making these tools, called knapping, was dangerous. You're striking a rock with another rock, sending sharp shards of stone flying everywhere. It was easy to get a deep cut, and as we've seen, any cut could be fatal. Eye injuries must have been common. Or what about the job of maintaining the fire? A fire was life. It provided warmth, protection from predators, and a way to cook food, which made it safer and more nutritious. But letting the fire go out could be a disaster, especially in a cold climate. Someone had to be responsible for tending it, for making sure there was always fuel. This person had to venture out to collect firewood, exposing them to all the dangers of the wilderness. And fire itself is a hazard. A stray spark could set a shelter on fire. A child could fall into the embers. Even something as simple as getting water was a dangerous job. Water sources like rivers and water holes were a magnet for all kinds of animals. Predators knew that prey had to come to drink, so every trip to the river was a trip into a potential ambush zone. Not to mention the risk of drowning, or the invisible danger of waterborne parasites and bacteria. And we haven't even talked about the other people. We have this romantic idea of small, peaceful groups living in harmony with nature. But the world was a competitive place. Resources were scarce. Different groups of early humans would have been in competition for the best hunting grounds, the best shelters, the best sources of water and stone. Conflict between groups was likely a regular part of life. Being on watch, defending the group's territory from rivals, was a job that could end in a violent death at the hands of your own species. This is the real heart of the matter. The most dangerous job for an early human was simply being an early human. There was no single role that contained all the risk. The risk was everywhere, all the time. The hunter who survived a mammoth charge could die from a snake bite while sleeping. The woman who survived a dangerous childbirth could die from eating a poisonous mushroom. The toolmaker who mastered his craft could be killed by a raider from another clan. Life was a fabric woven from threads of danger. You couldn't separate one task from another. The hunter needed the tools the toolmaker made. The whole group needed the plants the gatherer found. The future of the group depended on the women who survived childbirth, and everyone depended on the fire, the water, and the safety of the group. Each role was connected, and each role was lethal in its own way. So, if forced to give a single answer, it's a cop-out. But it's the honest one. There was no single most dangerous job. The entire project of living was the most dangerous job. The daily grind of finding food, staying warm, avoiding predators, and raising children in a world that was actively trying to kill you at every turn. We can try to rank them. Hunting provides the most dramatic images of danger. Childbirth provides the most stark, brutal statistics of mortality. Gathering reveals the insidious, hidden dangers. Scavenging shows a level of nerve-wracking audacity that is hard to comprehend. But they were all just different facets of the same struggle. The real job was to wake up in the morning and be alive when the sun went down. That was it. That was the victory, and the number of people who failed at that job every single day was staggering. We are the descendants of the ones who succeeded. The ones who were strong enough, smart enough, brave enough, and lucky enough to navigate that world of death. They were the hunters, the gatherers, the mothers, the toolmakers, and every single one of them had the most dangerous job in the world.